They said I was imagining things, that a loyal wife should trust her husband. But when I walked into that meeting room and saw his mistress in my seat, smiling like she owned my life, I didn't argue. I simply handed over the envelope. And when his boss saw the signature at the bottom, everything changed. If you believe in truth, justice, and the quiet strength of women who rise from betrayal, join our community. Subscribe, like, and stay for the whole story, because this one ends with power. It started with a parking space. I know, that sounds ridiculous, but if you've ever been the last one into a conference meeting at a luxury hotel in Midtown, hair frizzed from the rain, blazer damp and sticking to your arms, you'll understand how something as small as a parking space can feel like a declaration of war, especially when the parking spot is yours, marked with your initials. Reserved every Thursday for the bi-weekly executive leadership summits my husband and I were both part of, until recently. I'd spent 12 years climbing the cold metal ladder of corporate strategy. I didn't marry into power. I negotiated it, wrestled it, bled for it, while Daniel, my husband, charmed boardrooms with his polished rhetoric. I buried myself in contracts, compliance, and deal structuring. We were the perfect team until our ambitions began to run on parallel, not intersecting, tracks. The distance started like all things do, silently. A late night here, an unopened text there. His phone flipped screen down during dinner. The business trips extended just a day longer than necessary. But I didn't panic. Not yet. Not until the parking spot was gone. That Thursday morning, my usual spot, marker 47A, was occupied by a sleek black BMW with vanity plates I didn't recognize. I circled twice, annoyed. The valet was apologetic but useless. "Maybe someone made a mistake, ma'am," he said, averting his eyes. No, not a mistake. I parked on the lower level and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heels echoing against the concrete like gunshots, the kind of sound that says, "She's coming." I didn't expect the battle that was waiting for me upstairs. The executive conference room at the Hilton Grand looked the same as always. White tablecloths, Perrier and cut glass bottles, muted gray and cream decor so sterile it could have doubled as a surgical wing. But the energy shifted the moment I stepped through the double doors. The room turned, then paused. She was already seated, not in a guest chair, not along the back wall where assistants and interns huddled. No, she was in my seat. Seat 6, head of operations, directly across from the chairman and next to Daniel. She wore a red silk blouse, designer, immaculate, not something a junior strategist would wear to a high-stakes quarterly planning meeting. Her legs were crossed confidently. Her pen was expensive. She sipped from the glass I always used. And Daniel? He didn't flinch. His mouth curved into that careful smile he used on clients. Not warmth, not apology. Just smooth, calculated management of an uncomfortable moment. "Valerie," he said, like I was late to my own funeral. I looked at her. Young, glossy hair, perfect makeup, a touch too much confidence in her posture. She met my gaze without a flicker of shame. "You're in my seat," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. A few executives cleared their throats. Chairs shifted. No one made eye contact. Daniel chuckled lightly. "Sweetheart, we rearranged seating this quarter. Didn't the assistant loop you in?" The assistant, young, terrified and overworked, shrunk into her chair like air escaping a balloon. "No," I said, my voice steady. "She didn't." He gestured to an empty seat 3 spots down. "Just for today, transition period." I could have sat, swallowed the moment like a bitter pill, but I stood, every nerve ending in my body alert. Something deeper was at play. This wasn't about the seat. It was a message. I walked slowly around the table, the hem of my dress brushing my calves. With each step, I examined their faces. The CFO who owed me for saving his budget last fall. The director of legal who I'd mentored for 3 years. The chairman, old school and wary, but always polite. None of them met my gaze, except her. She watched me with quiet triumph, as if daring me to react. Her lipstick was the same shade I'd worn to the last gala. Her perfume, when I passed her, was familiar. Mine. She'd studied me. This woman wasn't an accidental mistress. She was a curated replacement. And Daniel had brought her into the belly of my career. I took the open seat without another word. But inside, something broke. A fault line, running clean through 12 years of loyalty. I didn't hear most of the meeting. Just noise, slides, numbers, words, All of it washed over me like static. What I did notice, her hand on his under the table. Barely a brush, but enough. Enough to confirm what I already suspected. I left without a word as soon as it adjourned. No eye contact. No goodbye. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me from the polished chrome. Auburn hair perfectly pinned, makeup flawless. But eyes, my eyes, betrayed the truth. I had been replaced, not just as a wife, but as a professional, a partner, a force. He thought he could erase me silently. But here's the thing about silence. It's easy to mistake it for weakness. By the time I reached my car, I'd already texted Marcus Patel, Daniel's boss. Not mine, Daniel's. There's something you should see. It concerns corporate integrity. Confidential. Your signature is required. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't going to sit quietly ever again. Not while someone else tried to live my life in my seat. There's a quiet panic that comes after humiliation. It doesn't scream or rage. Not at first. It moves differently, like cold water creeping under the hem of your clothes. You sit there, dripping, pretending not to shiver, pretending you didn't just drown. By the time I returned home that Thursday evening, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse. Calculating. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and cedar, an expensive candle Daniel had ordered from that pretentious shop in the West Village, the one I used to mock. It smells like a catalog for women who fake orgasms, I'd said once, and we'd both laughed. Now it just smelled like something she would like. The red blouse, the seat, the touch. She wasn't a fling. She was an infiltration. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and walked past the framed photo of us from last year's Aspen trip, our last real vacation. He looked happy. I looked tired. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of wine. Not red. I needed clarity, not sedation. The Sauvignon Blanc from the top shelf, the one Daniel never liked. I sat at the marble island where we'd once spent Sunday mornings reading the Times and eating croissants. And I waited. At 7:43 p.m., the front door opened. His footsteps were light, controlled, not guilty, not rushed, just polished. He wore the same navy suit from earlier, tie slightly loosened. His hair, salt and pepper now, was swept back with product, not wind. No scent of stress, no signs of remorse. "You're home early," he said, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. "Am I?" I replied, sipping. He kissed the top of my head out of habit, not affection, and moved to the fridge. That meeting ran longer than I expected. "How'd the rest of your day go?" There it was, the game. I didn't answer right away. Just watched him pour still water into a crystal tumbler like he was narrating a lifestyle ad. "She's very confident," I said finally. He didn't turn. "Who?" I raised an eyebrow. "The girl you gave my seat to." Now he turned. Slowly, measured. His eyes scanned my face, looking for signs of volatility, but I didn't give him any. Only ice. "She's part of the integration team," he said smoothly. "Marcus asked me to fast-track her onboarding. She's sharp. You'll like her." "I already don't," I said calmly. He exhaled a soft laugh, the kind meant to disarm. "Valerie, come on. You're being dramatic. These meetings rotate leadership presence all the time." It wasn't personal. "No," I said, rising to face him. "It was strategic." He blinked. And there it was, the flinch. Subtle, but there, the smallest crease in his performance. I didn't press. Not yet. I just walked toward our shared office and shut the door behind me. Locked it. Sat at my desk and opened the folder I'd started compiling 2 weeks ago. Because, yes, I'd suspected something. The change had been gradual. Hotel receipts in cities we hadn't visited. Sudden interest in hosting junior strategy mixers. Passwords changed without explanation. And most damning, a receipt for a Cartier bracelet for Mom's birthday. His mother hated jewelry, so I'd started tracking. Access logs, expense reports, a voice memo or two recorded while he showered, detailing progress with Project Jasmine, which, as far as the company record showed, did not exist. He thought I was distracted. And to be fair, I had been. My own division had just secured a contract with the State Department that nearly collapsed twice in arbitration. I'd been buried. Convenient for him. I opened a secure portal, one I'd built myself during a compliance audit 3 years ago, and uploaded the documents. There were enough discrepancies to make any executive sweat. Enough subtle fingerprints to warrant an internal review. But I didn't want an investigation. I wanted leverage. At 8:27 p.m., I sent the package. Not to HR. Not to legal. To Marcus Patel, CEO, founder, Harvard Golden Boy with a reputation so clean it made stainless steel look porous. He wasn't just Daniel's boss. He was his idol. And I knew something Daniel didn't. Marcus hated sloppiness, especially when it threatened the company's public image. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Marcus Patel. Need to see you. Alone. Tomorrow. Before anything official. 6:30 a.m. Bring originals. Don't tell Daniel. I stared at the message. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about dismantling a man who thought he could replace me with a clone and not expect repercussions. The Friday, 6:27 a.m. Marcus Patel's office, 40C second floor. The city was still gray when I stepped out of the private elevator. The office was dim, save for a single pendant light over Marcus's desk. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. Sit, he said. No greeting. I handed him the USB drive, and for a few minutes, the only sounds were the click of his mouse and the soft thrum of servers in the hallway. He exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ. I know. He looked up, eyes narrowed. He used her to gain access to the strategic restructuring documents. That's why he wanted her onboarded under your portfolio. I nodded. He's been feeding her confidential data, Marcus. Probably prepping her to pitch your replacement while smiling across from you at quarterly dinners. Silence. Then, do you want him fired? I didn't hesitate. No. That surprised him. I want something better, I said, voice steady. I want him to watch everything he tried to steal be handed back to the woman he tried to erase. I want to sit in my seat, with your signature. I want him to choke on the reality that I don't need him to keep this company standing. Marcus stared at me for a long time. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a fountain pen. Draft the memo, he said. I'll sign. 2 hours later, that memo was in my briefcase, embossed with Marcus's signature and the company seal. It reinstated me to oversight of strategic operations, with expanded authority. It reassigned all integration oversight to my division, and it formally required all junior strategists to report to me directly, including her. The paper was power, and I walked into the next meeting holding it like a blade. She was in my seat again, Daniel beside her. Same confident posture, same smug glance as I entered, but this time I smiled. I didn't say a word, just walked to the chairman, handed him the memo, and watched the air shift around the room like a storm rolling in. His eyes widened, then narrowed. Daniel looked confused, then horrified, and her, she froze, as if realizing, for the first time, the seat she stole was booby-trapped. I didn't need revenge. I had something better, authority. And they were about to learn what a woman does when she stops waiting to be respected and starts taking back everything. Now there's a sound people make when they realize their entire game just collapsed. It's not loud, not dramatic. It's a soft intake of breath, barely audible, like a gasp held hostage. She made that sound the moment the chairman looked up from the signed memo and said flatly, "Everyone out, except Valerie." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he knew better than to object. The mistress, red silk blouse again, this time with pearl earrings like a caricature of corporate femininity, lingered just long enough to meet my eyes. I tilted my head, just a little. She blinked first. The door closed. Silence. The chairman placed the memo between us like it was a weapon too dangerous to hold for long. "I assume this is accurate," he said, though it wasn't a question. I nodded. "Marcus signed this personally?" He did. He studied me, then sat back in his chair. "I've known Daniel for over a decade. He's a performer, charismatic. But I always said if this company ever went through a fire, you were the one I'd want in the bunker." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He leaned forward. "How deep does this go?" I pulled out the flash drive I hadn't given Marcus, because Marcus didn't need to know everything. Not yet. But Charles Merrick, the chairman, did. He wasn't just a relic of the old guard. He was the stabilizer. The man whose name whispered through corridors could raise or sink entire departments. He plugged the drive into his laptop, and I watched his face as the folders opened. Client communications flagged with inconsistencies, timestamps showing file access during supposed vacations, internal projections emailed to external servers, and, buried under a folder labeled innocuously Q3 prelim notes, a recorded Zoom call between Daniel and her. I'd set it to auto-record the night I suspected she'd used his company laptop while staying late to work on the onboarding packet. They didn't just talk about strategy. They talked about me. "She'll lose it," the girl said, laughing, her teeth too white under the harsh office lighting. Can't wait to see her face. She won't make a scene, Daniel said confidently. Val plays things cool, always has. That's why she's so damn easy to replace. I felt nothing watching it again. Just a vacuum. A sterile, perfect silence where affection used to live. When the recording ended, Merrick said only 3 words. Leave it with me. I exited the conference room to find the others pretending to check emails, scroll phones, sip coffee. But the air had changed. The younger associates stared like they weren't sure whose side to be on. Senior partners looked relieved, as if justice, long overdue, had finally arrived, wearing red lipstick and heels that didn't flinch. Daniel was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He straightened when he saw me, but his usual charm didn't reach his eyes. Val, he started. Don't, I said. He fell silent. That was new. We used to argue, passionately, loudly, with words that cut, then healed. But this wasn't an argument. This was aftermath. And that afternoon, I called a meeting. Mandatory. Strategic operations. Plus integration. Plus data security. Everyone came, including her. She sat in the 3rd row, tablet open, stylus in hand. Her blouse was blue this time. Soft curls pinned back like she was auditioning for the role of professional victim. I began without preamble. As of today, Strategic Operations is undergoing a security review. We've detected multiple inconsistencies in document access, and all integration-related activity will be temporarily redirected through my office. Some of the junior team members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked intrigued. I didn't flinch. The person or persons responsible for these breaches have yet to be officially named, but preliminary findings suggest internal leaks. Until this is resolved, all authorization levels are suspended. Her hand shot up. With all due respect, no, I said, cutting her off. This is not a dialogue. This is a declaration. The silence that followed was exquisite. After the meeting, she cornered me outside the elevator. Whatever you think you've uncovered, I haven't uncovered it, I said, stepping into the lift. I built it. I architected the access logs. I designed the security protocols. The digital fingerprints, yours. The timestamps, his. She hesitated. This could ruin both our careers. I smiled. That's the plan. The doors closed. That night, Daniel didn't come home. His name popped up once on my phone, just typing, in a message thread, but nothing came through. Cowardice looks different in powerful men. It doesn't cry or beg. It retreats quietly, hoping the woman it betrayed will calm down and remember her place. But I wasn't interested in place anymore. I was interested in position. Saturday morning, I met Merrick and Marcus in a quiet breakfast nook in Tribeca. No assistants, no press. Just French roast coffee and 3 plates of eggs no one touched. She's gone, Marcus said. HR's processing her release today. She tried to accuse another team member of sabotage, but we've got the audit trail. It's clean. She's done. Merrick looked at me. What do you want us to do about Daniel? I considered that. Truthfully, I didn't want him fired. Firing was too clean. I wanted him trapped, in the job he thought he owned, now under my thumb. I want him demoted, I said, to head of client transitions. Let him train new hires. Let him explain to every 24-year-old with an MBA why he lost his portfolio. Merrick raised an eyebrow. That'll humiliate him. I met his gaze. That's the plan. He nodded. And just like that, Daniel Mercer was removed from strategy, stripped of direct client authority, reassigned to onboarding and morale building, a role designed for visibility, but devoid of actual power. By Monday, his nameplate had been replaced. And by Wednesday, I was in his office, my new office, organizing the desk he'd once bragged was impossible to replace. I found her scarf in the bottom drawer. I mailed it back to her. No note, just a paperclip. They say power doesn't change people. It reveals them. What I learned that week is this. Men like Daniel don't believe women can be dangerous. They believe we cry. They believe we retreat. They believe we hesitate. But they forget. We also calculate. We survive. We wait. And when the time is right, we walk back into the room, not to reclaim a seat, but to redesign the table. And it took Daniel exactly 6 days to crack. 6 days of forced politeness during onboarding meetings. 6 days of junior staff pretending not to smirk when he walked into the room. 6 days of being stripped of client-facing power and handed fresh graduates to mentor, while I sat in what used to be his office, the same chair, the same view, the same executive privileges, reshaping the very system that once protected him. By the 7th morning, I found him waiting in my office. He was seated on the leather couch, legs crossed, his phone untouched on the coffee table. That alone told me he was unraveling. Daniel never sat still without distraction. "Good morning," I said, voice even. "You've made your point," he said quietly. I set my coffee down, walking past him toward my desk. "Which point was that exactly? I've been making so many lately." His jaw tightened. "You think this is justice, Val?" I leaned on the edge of the desk. "Oh, Daniel, this isn't justice. This is foreplay." He flinched, just a little. "Enough. I didn't mean to hurt you," he tried. "No," I said. "You meant to replace me. There's a difference." He looked away. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "Do you remember Paris?" The question caught me off guard. I did. Paris had been our turning point, 4 years into the marriage, before the power dynamics shifted. Back then we were still aligned, still a team, still whispering dreams in rented flats after midnight. "Don't romanticize your way out of this," I said, colder than I felt. He stood slowly. "I just wanted to remind you of who we were before all this." But that's the thing with betrayal. It rewrites every memory, turns laughter into foreshadowing, changes intimacy into misdirection. Even the good moments get retrofitted with suspicion. He moved to the door. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be," he added, his voice low. A warning, or maybe a plea. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I hadn't even started. And later that day, I began cleaning out the rest of his old office drawers. The top compartments had already been sanitized. Pens, corporate swag, sticky notes branded with the company logo. But the bottom drawer, the one with the false back panel, was locked. Interesting. I retrieved a small flathead tool from my bag. Call it paranoia or preparation. But I'd learned a long time ago to carry more than just lipstick, and popped the latch gently. The panel gave way with a soft click. Inside, I found an envelope, cream-colored, handwritten. My name on the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. Not Daniel's, hers. Inside was a single letter, dated 6 weeks prior. "Estet germ. Now, Valerie, I know you'll find this eventually. And yes, I wrote it knowing full well you'd get promoted into this office once everything shifted, because I know how these things go. I'm not writing to apologize. I'm writing because I want you to understand something that Daniel will never admit. This wasn't personal, at least not at first. Daniel came to me, not the other way around. He said he needed someone with initiative, someone hungry, said the board was going soft and needed fresh eyes. He told me things about you, how you were losing your edge, how you were more married to the spreadsheets than to the vision. I believed him, but then I started watching you, reading your briefs, your proposals, listening to how people spoke about you in the halls, and I realized he wasn't replacing a weak woman. He was trying to extinguish a brilliant one. That's when it became personal. Because I realized I wasn't the next Valerie. I was a prop in Daniel's illusion, and deep down, I think he always knew you'd find us out. I just didn't expect you to burn it all down so beautifully. I read it twice, then I shredded it, because I didn't need her admiration. I needed something more useful. I'd see Juan the next afternoon. I met with Cynthia Holloway, the firm's internal auditor. Cynthia had been with the company for nearly 15 years, a sharp-eyed strategist with the memory of an elephant and the bedside manner of a guillotine. We were never close. But today, we shared a goal: accountability. "I need your help verifying something," I said, sliding a slim file across her desk. She opened it, her expression unreadable. "These are flagged reimbursements Daniel submitted last quarter," I continued. "I've traced most of them to personal travel. Hotels, dinners, even a boat rental." Cynthia raised one eyebrow. "With company funds?" "Precisely." She flipped through the pages. "Who else knows?" "Just you and me, for now." She nodded slowly. "And what would you like me to do?" "Build the case. Clean, unbiased. If this goes to the board, it needs to be bulletproof." Cynthia smiled. "Not warm, but real. I've been waiting for someone to clean house around here." The audit took 5 days. On the 6th, the findings were presented, discreetly, behind closed doors, with Merrick presiding. Misappropriation of funds, ethics violations, breach of contract. Enough to sever Daniel's stock vesting schedule. Enough to trigger a clause I'd helped write 4 years ago. The one that stripped departing executives of severance if misconduct was proven. He wouldn't just lose his position. He'd lose millions. The board was stunned, not because they couldn't believe it, but because they finally saw what I'd been forced to live through, the curated charm hiding structural decay. Merrick asked me the final question. What do you want to do? I looked out the window. From this floor, the skyline looked different. Smaller, containable. I want a clean exit clause, I said. He resigns. No lawsuit, no NDA, no attempt to reclaim stock or reputation. He walks, quietly. Merrick nodded. And if he refuses, then I don't stay quiet either. But Daniel received the offer that night. He accepted in less than an hour. I didn't hear from him again. But 2 weeks later, a thin envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Just a plane ticket to Paris. One way. Business class. No note. Just the destination where it all began. I threw it away, because I don't go backward. And yet, that night, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Not of Daniel. Not of us. Of me. Me before him. Before this career. Before the titles and betrayal. Back when I still smiled without calculating the cost. Back when I still believed love was a thing built, not borrowed. And I realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. And that terrified me more than anything. Because now, with the seat reclaimed, the empire restructured, and the mask removed, I had to decide who I was without the war, and what kind of woman I'd become next. And for the first time in months, I slept. Not drifted. Not dozed. Slept. The kind of sleep that comes after war. After bloodshed and strategy and the final collapse of everything you thought you needed to survive. When the body no longer expects attack, it rests. And when it rests, it heals in the dark. When I woke, it was 5:42 a.m. No alarm. No scheduled meeting. Just sunlight slicing through the blinds of my penthouse bedroom like it had permission to reclaim me. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch itself awake. Yellow taxis, construction cranes, dog walkers and overpriced sneakers. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The battlefield was gone. The enemy was gone. The silence was almost unfamiliar, but silence, like power, requires learning how to sit with it. That morning I didn't dress in armor. No blazer, no heels. I wore linen, barefoot, lip balm instead of lipstick. I wasn't hiding. I was reorganizing. Internally. Quietly. Because as much as the victory felt complete, Daniel stripped of status, his mistress gone, my role reinstated with more power than before, there was still something unfinished. A question that hadn't stopped gnawing at me since I read her letter. He came to me, told me things about you, how you were losing your edge, more married to the spreadsheets than to the vision. The betrayal didn't begin with a lie. It began with a narrative, and narratives are powerful. More than evidence. More than facts. They shape perception, control reputations. So the question I needed to answer wasn't, why did he do this? It was, what version of me did I let him sell? And later that day, I called a contact from before my rise to executive leadership, a woman named Elena Dubois, a reputation strategist who once worked with Fortune 100 CEOs to neutralize scandals before they went viral. We'd met years ago during a panel on digital identity. She'd spoken about narrative architecture like a general planning an airstrike. Elena, I said when she picked up, I need to see what people say about me when I'm not in the room. She laughed softly. So, it's legacy season? Something like that. 2 days later, we met at a quiet rooftop lounge in Soho. She arrived with a tablet, a manila folder, and that same clinical calm that once made a senator cry during a post-affair rebrand. I ran a full WhisperNet audit, she said, sipping her espresso like it wasn't spiked with hard truths. Internal communications, Slack leaks, back-channel feedback loops, anonymous reviews, HR sentiment maps. Give it to me straight, I said. She slid the tablet across the table. On the screen was a heat map. Me, Valerie Mercer, positioned at the center. Around me, nodes, colleagues, clients, staff, interns, all linked with color-coded data points. She's brilliant. She's terrifying. Unapproachable. Respected. Not liked. Intimidating. Too perfect. Mechanical. Sharp as hell. Would follow her into fire. Wouldn't invite her to lunch. And there it was. The narrative. I had won the war, but I'd done it like a machine. Clean. Precise. Surgical. Efficient. No mess. No emotion. Which, ironically, had made me easier to erase. Daniel hadn't destroyed me alone. I'd vanished quietly long before he replaced me. In choosing control, I'd surrendered softness. I read every comment, some stinging more than I expected. One in particular haunted me. She doesn't even blink when people cry in meetings. It was true. I'd been trained for it. To survive in boardrooms that ate empathy for breakfast. To never show cracks. To never give them the thing they wanted most. A woman who made them uncomfortable with her feelings. And in doing so, I'd become untouchable, but also unrecognizable. That weekend, I didn't open my laptop. Instead, I walked. I went to Central Park and people watched for hours. I bought street food. I wandered into a jazz bar by accident and stayed for 3 hours just to listen. I let a woman braid my hair at a pop-up booth for no reason at all. And on Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I visited my sister. Claire and I had drifted. Not because of any great betrayal. Just the slow erosion that happens when one sibling turns corporate and the other opens a bakery in Brooklyn. She was frosting cupcakes when I arrived, her hands covered in sugar and egg yolk. "You look tired," she said. "I won," I replied. She handed me a warm muffin. "What did it cost?" I bit into it before answering. "Everything that made me human." She smiled. "Well, good thing that's the easiest part to get back." A Monday morning, I returned to the office. But not the way I had before. I arrived in flats. I let my curls fall naturally instead of wrangling them into a corporate bun. I brought donuts for the entire floor. Not for strategy. Not for manipulation. Just because they were glazed and still warm. The interns stared like I'd grown antlers. Good. Let them rethink the narrative. I called an all-hands meeting. Not mandatory. Not on the schedule. People came anyway. And I stood in front of them. The woman who had just taken down a fraudulent executive, unseated a scandal, and restructured half the leadership board, and said, "I want to change." The room went still. I want this company to be better. Not just more profitable. Better. For everyone. For the assistants who haven't taken a real lunch break in 3 years. For the single dads who miss every school pickup. For the interns who stay until 9 p.m. because they think that's the only way to get noticed. No one moved. And then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another. Then everyone. Not because I demanded it, but because, maybe for the first time in years, they believed me. Not the version Daniel sold. Me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment. No makeup, no filters, just me and the city behind me, lit up like 1,000 tiny second chances. I didn't see a victim, or a strategist, or a wife, or a warrior. I saw a woman, fully human, finally whole, and for the first time in years, I smiled at her. When there are 3 types of power in the corporate world. The first is positional. A title, a corner office, the nameplate on your door. The second is relational. Who owes you, who fears you, who dines with you when the press isn't watching. The third is invisible. Reputation, whispers. The truth that travels quietly behind closed doors, passed like contraband through back channels and blind CCs. I had won the first. I'd rebuilt the second. But the third? The third was out of my hands. Because when scandal fades from the headlines, it doesn't vanish. It reconfigures. And just when I thought I'd closed every door Daniel had opened, one more creaked back open. It was a Tuesday. Late. Almost 9 p.m. I was the last one on my floor, reviewing a new proposal for an international client. My new assistant had gone home hours earlier. The building hummed with its nighttime rhythm. Elevators sighing, janitors murmuring, city lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then came the knock. Soft, hesitant. I looked up, expecting security or a delivery gone to the wrong floor. But it wasn't either. It was her, not the mistress. The wife, Daniel's first wife. I'd only heard about her once, years ago. A throwaway detail Daniel offered during one of our early getaways. Over wine and laughter, and that late-night vulnerability people confuse with honesty. Didn't last, he'd said. We were young. She wanted a quiet life. I wanted Manhattan. She stepped into the room slowly. No makeup. Neutral flats. Slacks and a white blouse buttoned to her throat. Her hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense bun that reminded me of, well, me, back then. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, she said softly. I stood. Can I help you? She nodded, then sat down in the chair across from me like we were old friends catching up, not strangers bound by the same man's lies. I'm not here to defend him, she said. I'm here to warn you. Her name was Rachel, and what she told me reshaped everything I thought I understood about Daniel. Not the infidelity, not the corporate sabotage. I'd already unraveled those. But the foundation, the why. He never used to be like this, she said, voice low. When we met, he was idealistic, hungry, but ethical. He believed in merit, in hard work. She sipped the water I'd offered. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice never cracked. Then something changed after he joined Albrecht and Macmillan. That was the first time I saw it. The manipulation, the image building. He started lying about little things. A promotion he didn't get, a bonus that never arrived. He bought me a necklace and told me it was from Paris. I found the receipt from Macy's. She smiled bitterly. I left before it got worse. Or so I thought. She looked up at me. Until I saw your name in the news last month. The memo, the demotion, the audit, the Paris ticket, all of it. How did you... I have friends. In journalism, in compliance, in survivor groups. That last part made me sit up straighter. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the desk. Inside, names. 3 of them. Women. All had worked with Daniel. Different companies, different departments. Same pattern. Flirtation, mentorship, promotion, affair, collapse, discrediting. 2 had left the industry entirely. 1 had attempted suicide. The last page was a photo. Daniel, arms slung around one of the women at a corporate retreat, grinning like a man who owned the world. Rachel looked me in the eye. You didn't just expose a scandal. You interrupted a pattern. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The weight of it was different than betrayal. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman who never made it to the seat I'd reclaimed. Every voice buried under charm and spin and weaponized professionalism. Rachel stood. You don't owe me anything. I just thought you should know what you walked into. I nodded slowly. Thank you. As she turned to go, I said, Why now? Why speak up now? She paused at the door. Because for the first time, someone didn't just survive him. She beat him. Then she was gone. And that night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the folder for hours. I read each statement, each HR report, each formal complaint that had gone nowhere. I saw the same patterns I'd seen in forensic cases. The silencing of credibility, the smearing of reputation, the quiet handshakes that made truth irrelevant. And I saw something else, an opportunity. The next morning, I emailed Marcus and Merrick. Subject, Proposed Initiative, Internal Equity and Ethics Task Force. Inside, a 5-page proposal. A dedicated team to investigate historic HR discrepancies. Anonymous reporting channels. Third-party oversight for conflict of interest cases. A mentorship recovery program for female employees, sidelined by personal entanglements or unethical retaliation. And at the bottom, it's time we stop protecting men who win at the cost of the women they break. I'm Valerie Mercer. 2 hours later, both replied, approved, immediate funding, full authority. And by Friday, the first 3 hires were onboarded. By Monday, the portal was live. By Wednesday, we had 17 submissions. 3 of them directly referencing Daniel. And as I read each story, some full of rage, others trembling with grief, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was reclamation. Of narrative, of truth, of space, of seat. I didn't just want my career back. I wanted every woman he'd buried to rise again. And that evening, I stood at the glass wall of my office, watching the city buzz and blink and breathe. My reflection hovered over it like a ghost, but it didn't haunt me anymore, because the woman in the glass, she wasn't a wife, or a victim, or a cautionary tale. She was a reckoning, and she had only just begun. And I used to fear boardroom silence, not because of what it meant, but because of what it masked. I'd learned long ago that silence in those rooms wasn't absence. It was resistance, a pause pregnant with calculation, with politics, with the unspoken message, we'll let you speak, but we're not listening. That fear was gone now, because I had stopped asking for attention and started commanding it. When the quarterly board meeting began that Thursday morning, I was no longer just another executive presenting her metrics. I was the architect of the firm's most aggressive internal audit in over a decade. The woman who'd taken down a rising star with a signature and a spreadsheet. The name behind the task force now referred to in quiet corners as Valerie's Firewall. The room was full. Marcus, Merrick, 5 partners from International, 2 outside consultants, and 1 very specific guest I had handpicked to sit in the observation row. Rachel. She wasn't there to speak. She was there to witness. Because today, I wasn't just presenting numbers. I was delivering a case study on how to burn down a legacy and build something better on its ashes. As the screen lit up with the first slide, Operational Stability Through Ethical Reconstruction. It sounded clinical, strategic, almost boring, exactly how I wanted it. What followed was anything but. I walked them through the metrics: profit margins unaffected despite turnover, internal reporting up 63%, employee satisfaction up 41%, talent retention up 22%. Then I showed them the timeline: 12 weeks. The exposure of Daniel's misconduct, the removal of his replacement, the reinstatement and expansion of operations oversight, the launch of the Equity and Ethics Task Force, the digital whistleblower platform. The first 3 internal investigations completed, 2 leading to dismissals, 1 resulting in a public apology from a senior VP. Then came the real data: impact projections. I didn't just clean up Daniel's mess. I used it as leverage to modernize the company's ethics infrastructure. HR was no longer a fire extinguisher. It was a firewall. Legal wasn't reactionary. It was strategic. And the best part? Clients noticed. I clicked to the next slide. 4 high-profile accounts had renewed contracts early, citing our integrity-forward restructuring as their reason. 2 had increased their retainer amounts. Merrick leaned back, arms folded, nodding slowly. Marcus smiled, but I wasn't done, because I'd saved the best for last. Before we moved to vote on the retention bonuses, I said, "There's one more matter to address." I clicked the remote again. Up came a document, blurred, redacted, but real. Confidential Financial Activity Review. Mercer Holdings. I let it sit on the screen while I walked slowly to the end of the table. This file contains transactions between 2019 and 2023. Daniel Mercer listed as the principal officer on 5 shell companies, one incorporated under his name, the others under aliases, all tied back to procurement contracts where pricing was manipulated. Marcus stiffened. Merrick sat up straight. This was separate from what he did to me. This was systemic, a quiet siphoning that, over time, cost this firm over $2.1 million in manipulated margins. The funds were laundered through consulting retainer inflation and offshore intermediaries. A beat of silence. "Where did the money go?" Merrick asked. I clicked to the next slide. Paris, Geneva, Singapore, luxury real estate, fine art, and speculative crypto under shell buyers. Some of the accounts have already been frozen. The rest are under investigation. Marcus turned to me. "How the hell did you find this?" I didn't answer, but Rachel smiled, because she knew. 3 weeks earlier, after our late-night conversation in my office, she'd given me access to a Dropbox folder. In it were financial files Daniel had once shared with her to boast, to manipulate, to impress, tax returns, offshore contracts, bank statements he didn't think she understood. But Rachel was smarter than he gave her credit for. She'd kept everything, and I'd spent 2 sleepless weekends cross-referencing it with internal procurement files, flagging vendor anomalies, running the numbers through a forensic audit model I hadn't used since graduate school. I didn't just want Daniel out of my life. I wanted his entire web dismantled. The board voted unanimously to initiate formal legal proceedings against him. An independent investigation would follow, but the foundation had already been laid. And when the meeting adjourned, people didn't rush out the door as usual. They lingered, to shake my hand, to congratulate me, to ask how I did it. I didn't answer most of them, because this victory wasn't about applause. It was about correction, restoring a system that had been bent too long under the weight of plausible deniability. And outside the boardroom, I found Rachel waiting by the elevator. She didn't speak. She just nodded. And for the first time, we were not 2 women connected by betrayal. We were 2 women united by reconstruction. That night, I opened a bottle of wine. Not the usual celebratory kind. This one I'd been saving for something different. A 2011 Bordeaux I'd bought when I first became partner. I'd never opened it, always waiting for the perfect moment. Turns out, there is no perfect moment. Just moments you decide to mark with meaning. I poured a glass and sat at the dining table. Alone, but not lonely. My phone buzzed. A message from Claire, my sister. "Claire, so, I just saw your name trending. Again. CEO whisperer now? Want to come frost cupcakes for a weekend and remind yourself what flour feels like?" I laughed. Then typed back, "Only if I can bring spreadsheets." It would be weeks before the press got hold of the full Daniel Mercer scandal, months before the task force results went public, years before some of the wounds would fully heal. But I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be loved, not to be chosen, not to be safe. I had taken the seat they stole from me and built an empire around it. And for a while, things quieted. That's how it always happens after a storm. People stop whispering. Emails shrink back to 3 sentences. There are fewer eyes on you in the hallway, not because you've been forgotten, but because they're waiting, watching. Not for failure exactly, but for human cracks. It was in that space of uneasy calm that I began building something else. Not vengeance, not retaliation, legacy. And the task force had grown faster than anticipated. By week 5, we had 47 active submissions under review, 9 launched investigations, and 4 ex-employees reaching out voluntarily to testify. HR had shifted from a compliance shield to a structural pillar, finally functioning not as the firm's emotional custodian, but as its ethical compass. And yet, the farther I moved from Daniel's shadow, the more I found myself haunted not by what he'd done, but by how close I had come to believing his version of me. There were nights I still replayed things in my mind. Little phrases, passive comments. You're too sharp sometimes. Maybe soften the pitch. You always go straight to the numbers. Not everything is a war, Val. He hadn't gaslighted me directly. He'd done something worse. He'd reframed me. Until I began editing myself. Just enough not to be threatening. Just enough not to provoke. Just enough to be taken seriously, but never personally. And that was the damage I had yet to undo. And then came the voicemail. It arrived on a Wednesday. I was in the middle of reviewing a cross-border merger risk assessment when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, thinking it was spam or some overseas vendor looking for a callback. Hours later, I listened, and everything paused. Val, I don't know why I'm calling. I've deleted this message 3 times, but I keep recording it again. I saw the news. I know you did it. All of it. The audits, the board, the task force, the investigations. They're calling it the Valerie Doctrine. Do you know that? A whole policy shift built on your name. I thought I'd be able to outrun it, that by the time it caught up, I'd be on a beach somewhere with new accounts and clean credentials. But I wasn't ready for you. I underestimated you. No, I knew you could do this. That's why I worked so hard to break you before you remembered who you were without me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to hear your name one more time before the lawyers swallow the rest of this. I loved you. In my own broken, selfish way, I loved you. Goodbye, Val. I sat frozen. Not from grief, not from longing, but from the sudden, staggering realization that I had once believed this man was my future. And I didn't respond. I didn't forward the message to legal. I didn't save it. I simply deleted it. Because this wasn't his story anymore. It was mine. And later that week, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership summit hosted by a global investment group. The topic? How to lead after betrayal. I nearly said no. Not because I wasn't ready to speak, but because I wasn't sure I was ready to be seen. Publicly. Rawly. Not as the executive who'd dismantled an empire from within, but as the woman who had once been betrayed in broad daylight and walked back into that room anyway. But something in me shifted as I read the speaker list. 14 women, all from different industries. 3 of them former colleagues of Daniel's from other firms. One of them, a survivor of his earliest manipulation, now the VP of a clean tech company. I accepted. But, and 2 weeks later, I stood in front of 300 women in San Diego, wearing a deep blue dress and no armor, no blazer, no prepared jokes, no rehearsed answers, just truth. I didn't want to be the woman with the story, I began. I wanted to be the woman with the stats, with the results, with the bulletproof career. A soft laugh rippled through the crowd, recognition. But when betrayal arrived, when the seat was taken, and the trust severed, I realized something painful. I paused. They didn't take my power. They took my reflection, and I spent months staring into a mirror trying to recognize the woman they tried to erase. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Holy. I got it back, not by fighting harder, but by refusing to disappear. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, and it filled something in me I didn't know had gone hollow. And back in New York, the office had changed. People smiled differently. There was warmth in the hallways, a little more humanity in the way staff interacted. The environment wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was aligned, and so was I. That Friday, I closed my laptop at 5:02 p.m. for the first time in months. Claire was waiting outside, engine running, waving like a teenager from her dented bakery van. We drove to the Hudson. No agenda. Just fresh air and music, and the kind of silence that doesn't require filling. As the sun set over the water, she asked, "Do you ever think about dating again?" I didn't flinch. Not because I had an answer, but because I finally didn't need one. "I think about loving again," I said slowly, "but I don't think I'll ever want to be owned again. Not emotionally, not structurally." She nodded. "That sounds healthy." I laughed. It was the first time the sound felt like it belonged to me. And that night, I wrote something in my private journal, the one I hadn't touched since before the divorce. Just 7 words. The woman they erased built her own empire. And underneath it, I drew a single line. A new beginning. But the first time I walked into that boardroom, I felt like I had to prove I belonged. Not because of my resume. God knows that was bulletproof. But because of the unspoken rules. The glances that lingered a beat too long. The questions about tone. The compliments on composure. The suggestions that I should slow down, bring others along. They called it feedback, but it wasn't. It was code. Code for don't outshine us. Code for know your place. Now, nearly a year after Daniel's exit, and my rise from humiliation to control, I stood at the same threshold, but I wasn't asking for permission to enter. I had the master key. It was the annual General Partners Strategy Session, a full-day summit held once a year in the Catskills, far from the skyline, the Wi-Fi, and the journalists. Just decision-makers, no assistants, no handlers, no escape. I arrived in black slacks and a burgundy turtleneck. No name badge, no title tag. I didn't need either. The receptionist greeted me with a smile that said she knew. The valet offered me a coffee without asking. The concierge whispered, "It's good to finally see the right woman walking in with power." Power didn't need to announce itself anymore. It traveled ahead of me. Makikag. The morning began with perfunctory updates. Market volatility, new client acquisition, cyber risk mitigation. I let it all wash over me. My turn came after lunch. I'd been scheduled for a 45-minute future vision presentation. I took 12 minutes. No slides. Just stories. I don't want to talk about the future as if it hasn't already begun, I said, standing at the head of the table. Because what you're all feeling, this shift in culture, in control, in credibility, that's not a vision, it's a consequence. They listened, not out of obligation, but because I no longer spoke like a soldier. I spoke like the architect of the building they were sitting in. Last year, this firm nearly imploded, not from external scandal, but from internal negligence. We let charisma outrun character. We let Polish excuse exploitation. And we underestimated what one woman can do when you back her into a corner. A pause. I was that woman. No one blinked. I won't apologize for the fire I started, because what you see rising now is stronger, cleaner, more aligned with the clients we claim to serve. I looked down the table. You asked me for vision. That's it. And I sat down. And the room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Merrick, ever the traditionalist, said, "So what's your proposal?" I slid a 1-page document across the table. The Mercer Clause. Named, not in reverence, but in warning. A new ethics protocol. Any executive accused of ethical misconduct would face immediate third-party investigation. No more internal containment. Automatic audits for any leader flagged in back-channel reports. Mandatory coaching for any manager with employee churn above 35% in a fiscal quarter. And, most radical of all, a morality rider tied to partner bonuses. In short, profit was no longer the only performance metric. Marcus read it twice, then looked up. "You're redefining accountability." I met his gaze. "No, I'm institutionalizing it." The vote passed unanimously. Naya. After the session ended, I took a walk through the woods alone. The sky was overcast. The leaves were beginning to turn. I could smell rain on bark, the thick promise of change. And that's when I saw her. Not Rachel. Her, the mistress. Only, she wasn't that anymore. She was a former employee, now working at a boutique consulting firm in Brooklyn, according to the background intel I'd quietly tracked. She was attending the summit as a junior associate for a small firm doing compliance audits for our subsidiaries. She wasn't in power anymore. She was adjacent to it, And she saw me. She didn't wave, didn't approach. She just stopped. And for a brief second, we stood facing each other between trees, two women shaped by the same man, now orbiting different realities. Then she nodded, not in apology, but in acknowledgement, as if to say, "You won." And I walked on. One Bunda that night, I received an email from HR. Subject, Internal Candidate Reinstatement Recommendation. I opened the file. One of the junior strategists who'd left the company last year under Daniel's regime, discredited after performance concerns, was petitioning to return. Her file was flawless, but what caught my eye was her cover letter. Just one line stood out. "I left when I lost faith. I'm reapplying because now I believe again." I approved her rehire. Personally. Then I drafted a memo to welcome her back. Not as a quiet internal transaction, but as a signal. That women who had been erased could return. That stories rewritten could be restored. That the seat she lost was still hers to reclaim. 2 days later, I held a private coffee meeting for all female employees at director level and below. No agenda, just space. I stood at the front of the room, looked them in the eye, and said, "I'm not here as an example of resilience. I'm here as evidence of what happens when systems finally get interrupted." They listened. Then they spoke. One by one, stories came out that had never been told. Microaggressions, unacknowledged brilliance, half-fought battles, names shared in whispers, projects stolen, meetings overtalked. And one by one, I gave them the one thing I never had when I needed it most, a witness. After everyone left, I sat alone in that room, and I realized something. I hadn't just reclaimed my seat. I'd made more of them. Dozens, hundreds, eventually. Because power isn't in keeping the chair. It's in building the damn table and leaving the door wide open behind you. I didn't plan to testify. It wasn't required. My written statements, internal audits, and digital documentation were more than enough. The evidence trail was clear, damning, airtight. Daniel's legal team had pivoted from bluster to damage control within days of the indictment. They were negotiating, begging, really. But then I received a message, anonymous, from a burner email routed through a foreign server. The contents weren't threats or blackmail, just a name, one I hadn't heard in over a decade, Annalise Kane. It stopped me cold. Annalise wasn't a former colleague. She was my first boss, the woman who mentored me when I was 23 and barely surviving on ambition, coffee, and the unshakable belief that if I just worked harder, I'd be safe. Annalise was brilliant, powerful, demanding, and absolutely unafraid of boardrooms packed with arrogant men twice her age. She was also, quietly, Daniel's first real target. I hadn't known back then. Neither of us had. But after I mentioned him once in passing, years ago, she had paused, gone cold, and said only, "Be careful. He plays long games, and he doesn't like being outsmarted by women." I thought it was bitterness. Now, I knew better. Annalise was the mystery witness. She contacted federal investigators 2 weeks before Daniel's hearing. What she gave them? Decades-old financial trails, whispers of tampered pitches, clients siphoned off just before contract negotiations, patterns too subtle for a single company to trace, but unmistakable across a career. She'd been watching him, for years, waiting for someone to drag him into the light, and when she found out it was me, she came forward. The hearing was closed door, no cameras, just a tribunal of ethics officers, 2 federal regulators, and a handful of corporate attorneys. Daniel looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but spiritually. The man who once swaggered through marble lobbies like a god now sat with his tie slightly loosened, hair graying at the temples, and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting with the edge of his notes. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't need to. He knew. Estacoma, and my name was called. I stood, and for the first time since this entire firestorm began, not as a strategist, not as an executive, but as a woman wronged, I spoke. "I'm not here for revenge," I began, voice steady. "I'm here because systems protect men like Daniel Mercer, systems that mistake charisma for credibility, that write off manipulation as networking, that allow entire careers to be built on the silent labor of the women they erase." I looked up, straight at him. He stole from this company, from its clients, from its culture. But worse than that, he stole time. He stole the momentum of women who had to rebuild from scratch because they were made to feel disposable. A pause. I was one of them. Another pause. But not the last. Which is why I'm here. Because someone has to say the thing no one says in these rooms. I exhaled. The cost of letting this happen again is not financial. It's generational. And I refuse to pass it down. I stepped back. And silence followed. The kind of silence that bends steel. After the hearing, I left without looking back. I didn't need to see his reaction. Because the verdict wasn't what mattered anymore. The exposure was. And that night, I returned home to find a package on my doorstep. No sender. Just a white box, sealed tight, with my name in neat black ink. Inside, a leather-bound planner. Old, worn, faded. But I recognized it instantly. Annalise's. I flipped through it carefully. It wasn't a planner anymore. It was a record. Every project she'd lost because Daniel had whispered the right poison into the right ears. Every junior employee she'd protected. Every detail that hadn't mattered. Until it did. At the back was a note. You closed the loop, I started. Now open the door for the ones behind us. AC. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, like steel cooling after battle. In the next morning, I sent a message to the board. Subject, proposal, Women's Leadership Accelerator. It would be the first of its kind. A 12-month program for high-potential women across departments. Pairing them with executive sponsors. Giving them direct access to strategy meetings. Equipping them not to fit in, but to reshape the firm entirely. No optics. No fluff. Just real infrastructure. Within an hour, funding was approved. I called it the Kane Initiative, because some legacies are built quietly and deserve to rise loudly. Then later that day, a junior analyst named Nadia stopped me in the hallway. She'd just completed a task I hadn't even assigned her. Refined a client acquisition model I'd built years ago. It was better, sharper, cleaner. Why'd you do it? I asked, surprised. She hesitated, then said, because I read your story, and I didn't want to waste time playing small. I looked at her. 24, brave, brilliant, eyes too wise for someone so new. And I saw a reflection I wasn't afraid of anymore. And that night, I stood at my apartment window, glass of wine in hand, watching the city exhale. There were still court dates ahead, headlines, analysts dissecting every move, but I wasn't waiting for closure, because I'd already built the thing he tried to destroy, myself, and now I was building others. Ben. There's a moment in every storm when the sky goes quiet, not because the chaos is over, but because the worst has passed. That was what life felt like now, not peace, but clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't building from panic. I wasn't reacting to loss. I was sculpting something, intentionally, quietly, relentlessly, and the world was beginning to notice. The Kane Initiative had launched just 2 months ago, and already, applications were pouring in, not only from within our firm, but from partner institutions, international subsidiaries, even competitors, women who had watched from the sidelines, women who had whispered in corridors for too long, women who had survived by shrinking. They were stepping forward now, asking for more. One applicant ended her personal statement with a line I couldn't stop thinking about. I've spent most of my career asking myself how to stay safe in rooms I wasn't supposed to be in. Now I want to learn how to change the layout. But with visibility came pressure. The press began to circle again, this time with a different tone. No longer scandal. Now, storytelling. They wanted profiles, interviews, magazine spreads, features with headlines like, "The Woman Who Burned the Old Playbook," or "From Betrayal to Boardroom." I turned them all down, because no matter how glamorous they made it sound, I knew the truth. I wasn't here to be famous. I was here to be effective. Then, one afternoon, I was invited to speak at a private forum hosted by the World Financial Ethics Council, closed to the public. Only 5 speakers. The room would include 40 CEOs, 50 policymakers, and 24 women who had never before been allowed to talk, only to take notes. They asked me to deliver the closing address. I almost declined, until I learned who else would be there. Daniel, not as a speaker, not even as an invited guest. He was attending as part of his ethics rehabilitation review, not by choice, but by court order. Irony, as it turns out, isn't always poetic. Sometimes, it's perfectly calculated. And when I entered the room, I didn't look for him. I didn't need to, because I wasn't here for Daniel. I was here for the 49-year-old tech founder still calling his female VPs girls, for the financial firm COO who still used emotional to disqualify dissent, For the young woman in the third row, gripping her pen like a sword and hiding her brilliance behind borrowed blazers and careful nods. I stepped up to the podium. No slides, no notes, just my voice, and I said, I was never supposed to be in this room. A few heads tilted. I was supposed to smile, soften, compromise. I was supposed to manage the room without making anyone uncomfortable, especially not the men who held the keys to the door. Soft laughter. Uneasy. Real. But I stopped asking for keys. Pause. I built the damn door. Now they were listening. Years ago, I lost everything I thought defined me. Not in a fire, but in a chair. A seat that was handed to someone who had smiled prettier, played quieter, listened better. I took a breath, and then I reclaimed it. Not by becoming louder, but by becoming undeniable. And the silence stretched, thick and reverent. I continued. Power isn't loud. It's not arrogant. And it's not fragile. Real power is legacy. And legacy begins the moment you decide your voice is louder than their comfort. I stepped back. Done. No applause. Not right away. Just silence. And then, not a standing ovation. Not cheering. Just people standing. Quietly. As if what they'd just heard wasn't a performance, but a reckoning. After the event, I walked alone to the back of the building, where the press wasn't allowed, and the limousines waited quietly. That's where I saw him. Daniel. Leaning against the side of a black town car, looking older, not broken, not regretful, just shrunk, like the pedestal had finally crumbled beneath him and he hadn't figured out how to stand on his own feet yet. He didn't approach me. He didn't need to. But as I passed, he nodded, subtle, hollow. I didn't nod back, because I wasn't angry. I was free. And that night, I walked into my apartment and found a single white envelope on my kitchen counter. Claire had been by earlier, dropping off pastries and unsolicited emotional support. Inside the envelope, a card, just 2 words, written in her messy handwriting. Next chapter? I smiled, then sat at my desk. I opened my laptop and began drafting something new. Not a proposal, not a presentation, not a takedown, a blueprint for a company, owned by women, run by survivors, built not on scarcity, but on abundance. A firm where mentorship wasn't a marketing strategy, where resilience wasn't a requirement for respect, where power wasn't hoarded, it was multiplied. The name, Reclaim. I stared at the word on the screen for a long time, not because I wasn't sure, but because I was finally certain. I hadn't just taken back my seat. I was designing new ones, wider, stronger, waiting, for every woman who'd ever been told she was too much, too emotional, too bold, too loud, too sharp, too fast. For every version of me that once sat silently, hoping they'd see me. I wasn't hoping anymore. I was building. There's a certain kind of freedom that doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like quiet. A quiet so complete it doesn't beg to be filled. A quiet that doesn't come from winning, but from releasing. Not just the past, but the version of yourself who fought so hard to be seen that she forgot how to simply exist. That was the kind of freedom I felt the morning Reclaim launched. There were no fireworks, no press junkets, no champagne flutes clinking over rooftop city lights. Just a group of 15 women gathered in a renovated brick building in Brooklyn, each one a survivor of some kind. Some had survived scandal, others silence. Some had walked away from glass ceilings, others had been thrown through them. All of them were done waiting. Taperdame, Reclaim wasn't a consultancy. It was a command center. We didn't market power. We built infrastructure. We didn't polish resumes. We restructured legacies. We offered legal defense funding for whistleblowers, executive coaching that didn't teach women to shrink, and a visibility platform that told stories that would never make the pages of Forbes, but moved mountains nonetheless. Within 2 weeks, our inbox had over 300 inquiries. By month 2, we had secured funding from 3 venture partners, 2 of them women who had once been forced out of the very firms we were now advising. By the end of the first quarter, we weren't a story, we were a movement. When I didn't attend every pitch meeting, I didn't run every strategy session, I didn't need to. Reclaim wasn't built on me. It was built on what I healed through me. And healing doesn't hoard authority. It distributes it. One Thursday afternoon, I received a letter. Yes, a literal letter. Folded neatly, written in blue ink on thick paper. There was no return address, just a name at the bottom. Amelia Reese. I didn't recognize it at first, until I read the letter. Dear Valerie, You don't know me, but I knew him. I was 19, intern, bright-eyed, too fast, too eager. He told me I had potential, that I reminded him of someone he used to love. I never reported what happened. I thought no one would believe me, but when I saw your story, I didn't feel afraid. I felt found. Thank you for holding the door open long enough for the rest of us to walk through it. With love, AR. I read it twice, then placed it in a small wooden box on my desk labeled simply, proof, not of pain, of impact. A morning sometime later, I was invited back to the firm, not as an employee, not even as a consultant, as the keynote speaker for their inaugural Rebuild Summit. They'd renamed it after restructuring the board, launching their own internal equity division, and publicly acknowledging the failures that allowed Daniel, and others like him, to thrive unchecked for years. The theme? What comes after survival? I stepped onto that stage wearing the same shade of lipstick the Mistress had once worn to our final boardroom battle, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a reclamation, because shame doesn't belong to women who were hurt. It belongs to the men who counted on their silence. Then I didn't speak long. I didn't need to. I simply said, we used to talk about breaking glass ceilings, but the truth is, some of us were never even inside the building. Some of us were watching from the parking lot. Some of us were cleaning the offices we'd never be invited to. Some of us were sitting at the table, only to be told we didn't belong there. And some of us had our seats stolen, our voices mimicked, our ideas diluted, our stories dismissed. I paused and let the silence breathe. Survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. The real power isn't just in standing back up. It's in making sure the next woman doesn't have to fall that far to be heard. And with that, I stepped down from the stage, not to applause, but to movement. People didn't clap. They stood, together, quiet, resolute, alive. And I didn't sit for the rest of the event. Not because there wasn't a seat, but because I didn't need one anymore. I had become the table. And that night, I walked home alone. No driver, no assistant, no entourage, just the city breathing around me. Brave, loud, unrelenting, like I'd learned to be. I passed a storefront window and saw my reflection. And for the first time in this entire journey, I didn't flinch. I didn't adjust my collar. I didn't correct my posture. I didn't analyze my own expression for cracks. I just looked. And she looked back. The woman who had been betrayed. The woman who had been erased. The woman who had sat in a chair and been replaced like a fixture. The woman who rose, who fought, who rewrote the rules. And I smiled. Not the polished smile of survival. Not the practiced smile of PR. But the raw, quiet smile of a woman who knew there was nothing left to prove, only more to build.